Recording has been started.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and on behalf of the Council for Strategic Affairs, I invite all of you to join our monthly roundtable discussion on a very important topic. Those of you who registered using our Eventbrite announcement probably saw this flyer with all our distinguished panelists. And the topic for today's roundtable discussion is India-US relationship, the way forward. Just to be on record, today is June 10th, 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime and 7:30 p.m. Indian time. There's a reason why we are having a roundtable discussion on this particular topic. Our four distinguished panelists are Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, Professor Holli Semetko, and Mr. Aledo. I'm not going to say more about Council for Strategic Affairs, except for saying that kindly go on our website, www.councilforstrategicaffairs.org. We do 2 programs a month, and we do other things as well. We recently started a fellowship training program in strategic studies. So if any of your students are interested, please encourage them to join our fellowship training program. Our first distinguished panelist is Professor Holli Semetko, and Professor Semetko joins us from Emory University in Atlanta. I'm not going to read her detailed bio because that'll take too much of time, but people can go onto the Emory website and look at her profile. I must say that she has lived in India as a Nehru Fulbright scholar along with her family and has conducted primary research data collection in India. So that would be very, very interesting. We have Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, who is retired Foreign Secretary to Government of India. He is joining from New Delhi. He has been a very, very public figure, having written more than 700 op-eds and things like that. I've interacted with Ambassador Kanwal from 2011 onwards, actually surprisingly in some think tanks meetings in Washington, D.C. And we have Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, who is also retired from Indian Foreign Services. Ambassador Trigunayat also is commentator on foreign affairs and prolific writer. He also works for several think tanks, including Vivekananda International Foundation. So again, I am not going to read the introduction word by word. And our last distinguished panelist is Mr. Aledo, who has a very, very specialized background. He's a former United States Army officer and a former CIA analyst. And actually, he has done a lot of intelligence and security and work. He has written papers, white paper for the White House Intelligence Council, etc., etc. So combined, we have more than 120 years of practical wisdom, experience, scholarship, professional experience amongst these four distinguished panelists. The reason we are discussing is this topic because Prime Minister Modi is going to come on June 22nd for a state visit of United States. So after my brief introduction, each panelist will give an opening statement for 5 minutes. This would be followed by a moderated discussion for 30 minutes, in which I'll be asking 3 rounds of questions to each of the panelists. Each panelist will be given 2 minutes to answer each question. And the last 30 minutes would be for our audience to ask questions. Questions are moderated through the chat room. And these are the 2 great leaders that we are talking about, that are trying to take level of relationship to a new horizon. If you look at historical vicissitudes of India-US relationship, there have been several phases, some not so good, some warming. There are mainly three phases, and the last phase is post 2000 onwards up till now. And in this phase, there has been definitely warming of relationships steadily, irrespective of who is in government in India or who is in government in United States. And that is a steady trend. But for those who are interested in history, there was a major reset in India-US relationship after the Pokhran 2 nuclear tests. There was 11 rounds of talks between Major Jaswant Singh and Stroke Talbot. It is called Jaswant Singh Stroke Talbot Dialogue, which led to the beginning of the current relationship. In fact, as we speak, Russia used to be the largest arms supplier to India, and over the last 20 years, India has diversified its procurement of weapons from other countries also, and US stands fourth in the line. We have had foundation agreements that have been signed that were considered as a roadblock to, bilateral security and strategic relationship. They all have been signed. There are joint exercises, and this guy, he was there actually last week in New Delhi, having meetings with India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. So taking the defense relationship to a new level. Before I start the distinguished panelists, just a few housekeeping announcements. Keep yourself muted, keep your cell phone on vibration mode. Please don't interrupt our distinguished panelists. All the questions have to be sent through the chat room. Please ask very precise questions. And lastly, this program would be recorded. It would be available on our website within 24 hours. Request to the panelists are that keep your opening statement less than 5 minutes. I have requested all of you to give a longer text of your opening statement because there's no word limit. Professor Semetko has already sent to me this morning. So I'm very, very happy and glad that she has done, but I hope other panelists will do that. I'm going to invite, first of all, Mr. Ron Aledo to talk about his views on India-US relationship because of his military and security background. So, Mr. Aledo, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate for the invitation today. Can everyone hear me well? Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna share my screen real fast. You allow me 1 second, please. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Ron, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna talk real fast. I'm very limited with time today, so I'm going fast. I apologize for any issue. From my viewpoint, I have to see this relationship between the United States and India based on the difficulties that right now the United States have with India. And the main difficulty that the United States have with India right now is India's way of neutrality in the conflict with Russia, between Russia and Ukraine. That's how I see it from a security and military viewpoint. And I'm going to explain myself really, really fast. Thank you very much for the introduction. As the doctor said, I'm a former U.S. Army officer. I was a CIA analyst contractor. I was at the Pentagon for 5 years as a Joint Staff Intelligence and Operation Officer. I was in Afghanistan several times, 4 times in 2011, 2012, 2014, 2015. I was advisor to the Afghan police. Right now, I run a consulting agency from Miami, Florida. I do international consulting in security, geopolitics, and military issues. India and the United States, they have usually, normally, a mutual benefit relationship from the economic viewpoint. Obviously, the United States looks into India for investments. The growth of India, the Home Minister of India asked me this personally when I was in New Delhi a few years ago, and I told His Excellency, listen, sir, we look into you as a growth opportunity. Your growth is bigger than the growth we have in the United States. You are a growing economy. We look for investments. It was a real honor to know the Home Minister of India back in 2017 and 2018 when I went to New Delhi. The United States also look into India from the military viewpoint as a partner in confronting blocs, call it as you want, China. The United States want to stop some way the growing of China or the threat of China thus to the South China Sea. And the United States look into these democratic alliances of India, Australia, even Philippines now, etc., as a way to counter China influence. Obviously, the United States give hundreds, thousands of investors visa to Indian people. It's famous here in the United States. The Mumbai investors, we call it, the Mumbai people that come here and open new businesses, create employment, they get the business visa. That's a very healthy relationship and mutual benefits for the United States. Who can deny it? About 15% of U.S. medical doctors are of Indian origin. That obviously is a help and a healthy contribution, literally healthy contribution to the United States. When we go to all hospitals, we go to all specialists, about 10, 15%, perhaps more of medical doctors in the United States are of Indian origin. And obviously, we have a very productive Indian migrant population in the United States that grows every year. And contrary to many other populations of migrants that come into the United States, the Indian population remains one of the healthiest, more productive, successful one in the United States. So that is a mutual benefit relationship that we usually have between the United States and India. The main problem, as I say, is Russia. The whole war have changed since February 2022. I want to refer myself to the former Chancellor Helmut Kohl, advisor and assistant. The German Chancellor Kohl, advisor and assistant, said once in a press conference, when you do what the United States wants you to do, they hug you. They hug you so strong that they want to crush your ribs because of a love hug they give you, the United States. But when you don't do what the United States wants you to do, they perhaps hate you and they begin to talk bad about you. How dare you not do what we tell you to do? Shame on you. So that was this very important to understand how the U.S. foreign policy works. Those words of the former assistant of Chancellor Kohl are very, very important to understand the U.S. mentality when they approach foreign relations and foreign affairs. To be honest, the United States really don't want equal partners. Yes, of course, verbally they say we want equal partners, we're equal partners, we are the same status with Europe, with Germany, with India, with Philippines, with Dominican Republic, with everybody, we're equal partners. In reality, not de jure, but de facto, the United States want people to follow their lead. People to do what the United States wants them to do and to say what the United States wants them to say. And currently, the big problem is that the United States is angry and frustrated with India not turning against Russia. The United States wants the whole world to openly and strongly support, 100% blindly support the Kiev regime. and declare economic war and condemn Russia strongly without any reservation. Kiev regime is the good guys, Russia is the bad guy, it's a monster, it's a demon, it's terrible, it's a dictator, and you have to do it. If you don't do it, you are not going to be loyal to the United States. You have to be loyal to the United States, and that's how you prove to the United States that you are loyal. You have to be 100% behind the Kiev regime and 100% in the economic war against Russia. That is the United States position, and that is the problem with India. India has a long, strong relationship with Russia, even from the Soviet times until today. And that is something that India is not willing to change right now because of the pressure from the United States. That is the main, as we say, stone in the rock, stone in the shoe, the pain on the hip, as we call it sometimes, between, that's the big elephant in the room between the United States and India right now. India has a strong military ties. The carriers from the Indian Navy are basically Soviet-made. India has a strong military to military, and right now economic relationship with Russia. The United States is angry at India buying Russian oil. The United States is angry at India because they are not 100% behind their economic war against Russia. They are not 100% with the Kiev regime against Russia. And some European experts and some American experts, they want and demand sanctions against India. Biden said that the situation with Russia and India is unresolved. That is the rock in the shoe, the stone in the shoe. That is the problem that the United States have right now with India. Some Americans, they clamor the United States to sanction India. They want to be punished by their foreign policy. They want to diminish and reduce the diplomatic engagement with India because of how India is behaving with its relationship with Russia.
Ron, can you conclude in 1 minute, please?
Okay, not immediate sanctions against India right now. Perhaps visa sanctions, perhaps more tariff sanctions. They are some of the tools that the United States might use against India. After the coup against Imran Khan in Pakistan, perhaps the United States may use Pakistan, a stronger relationship with Pakistan, just to put pressure on India. And remember, the United States always had the possibility and probability. This is the last tool in its toolbox of promoting a regime change, a Maidan revolution, a color revolution in India. That's why India has to be alert that the United States don't use that resource. I believe that the solution is what the foreign minister of India is promoting. India has its own way. India has its own right to follow its own path. India has 15% of the world population. Is an economic engine, one of the economic engines of the world because of the population, because of their presence in international affairs in the BRICS. So India has its own way. And I really believe that India should follow what the foreign minister is saying. Remain immune to pressures and follow a path that will only benefit India's way. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Ron, for very succinctly putting the irritants in the bilateral relationship. I am very happy that you very, cogently summarized the you are with us or you are against us attitude of United States State Department towards various countries. Now it's my distinct pleasure to invite Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, who is speaking to us from Delhi, to give his opening statement for 5 minutes. Ambassador Trigunayat.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. It is a great pleasure for me to be part of this very highly distinguished panel and to share some of my thoughts on the way forward. I think that the invitation to Prime Minister Modi to come for the state visit, and being the third one by President Biden in itself, a way forward. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was there in about 2009 at the invitation of President Obama. But since then, relationship has moved forward. And the reason is, very simply put, that both need each other. It is not a one way. And I'm quite sure what Ron said is largely true. In the background, what happens. But today, both countries do enjoy a comprehensive global strategic partnership covering nearly all areas of human endeavor, driven by shared democratic values, convergence of interests on a range of issues, and vibrant people to people ties. Now, this comprehensive partnership is also institutionalized, as has been mentioned before. The large number of contracts, agreements have been signed. There are dialogues, there are working groups, and there is a shared commitment at the highest level of the leadership. Even if it is driven by, I don't say it is so much driven by Russia, as was mentioned earlier by Ron, but it is more so because the new dynamic that is playing out in the geopolitical context is the emergence and hegemonistic China. And that's where United States, which is currently numero uno, is looking at a possibility of finding partners. It has been very more often than not suggested. Quad is a reflection of that. Second Quad with Philippines is another reflection of that. AUKUS is another reflection of that. But there also India and United States have a certain divergence of views exactly how to contain China or how to confront China, because China is a major problem both for India and the United States going forward in every single geography as far as we are concerned. So we have the bipartisan support for this India-US partnership, and it is a relationship of consequence and of a global good, and has a remarkable strategic alignment on geopolitical and geoeconomic interests and priorities. Now, I put it in a way, there's a 5D metrics, which I say, for the India-US relations. One is democracy. That is, I was happy to see John Kirby talking about India as a vibrant democracy at last. Deepening economic and technical cooperation, IC80, the new, we have seen the new mechanisms that have been created. And recently during Secretary Austin's visit, we saw Indus X. And then is defense and security, including cyber, space, and intelligence sharing. Then another D is disruptions due to Chinese hegemony and power differential. So that is what needs to be bridged. And then there is this relationship in itself is a deterrence which is inherent against the disruptors. And of course, the diaspora 4.2 million, which we have in your country, is highly present. Their achievements are very much counted, and they're remarkable, and their contributions for both the countries. In next stage, I would hope that they can be instrumental as tech facilitators, as they had done in the case of ICT and the financial domain. So we are going through a global disorder. Perhaps we are heading towards a Cold War 2.0. And there is a disjunct in our perceptions on various issues, which will definitely be discussed because of the several institutional mechanisms that we have. Russia-Ukraine war is one of those. India has maintained a principled position. And very often the commentators forget that it is not necessarily simply because we have a closer relationship or a special and privileged partnership with Russia. It is also because India has a history. India has a connect with the kind of policies that need to be done for peace, for dialogue, for diplomacy. So what is so wrong about talking about those things? When everybody else is talking about war, somebody has to talk sanity, and I think India brings sanity on the table. And we are not only doing it with regard to just saying for the heck of it. With China, we have a lot of problems on the border, but we are continuing to have dialogue with them. And this is also not, and we are able to withstand their pressure, which has been seen. As far as main problem between US and India is the mindset. While the United States think from the alliance mindset, India is looking an alignment mindset. Means a mutually beneficial, equal partnership. Of course, Ron said that they don't want equals, they want subordinates. That's not where India can stand in regard to that, and will continue to enforce itself. And India is an independent force. And it follows the principle of Vasudha Kutumbakam, means the world is one family. We are today hosting and chairing the G20. And G20, that has been the basic fundamental principle, because we are looking at the global thing. And when the 125, 30 countries of the world are supporting you and see you as a leader emerging, you cannot play a second fiddle to any country, irrespective. Now, we have seen that if, yes, I'm closing. Yes, I'm closing. Sorry. We have collaborations several places: Quad, IPF, I2U2, IUSU, G7+1, G20, and trilaterals. And we are also partners of the BRICS, SCO, RIC, and India's strategic autonomy is what one China, with the United States, will have to contend with and will learn to adjust to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Trigunayat. You bring a very fascinating Indian point of view to this discussion. Now it's my honor and pleasure to invite Professor Holli Semetko to give her opening statement. She has already given me written version, a detailed version of her statement, but let's welcome Professor Holli Semetko. Kindly unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Here we go. I'm on mute now there. Thank you very much. I have a whole paragraph of thanks, and I'm not going to use it now because I realize how we're all moving too slow for our 5-minute warning there, for our 5-minute cutoff point. So I'll just cut straight to the chase. There's much I disagree with about what Ron, our first speaker, said, and there's much I agree with about our second speaker, Ambassador. And I myself have bought Foreign Secretary Jaishankar's book and read it, put it in my library for my students to read, and somebody stole it. That's a strategy over here. Anytime you put some objective information on India out there, it gets stolen. I have to buy another copy. At any rate, I would like to start by making a big point, which is the time in which we're living is one that I would say can be described as the end of an era. And I think we collectively face at least 3 urgent global challenges. One is combating the multifaceted consequences of climate change. Another is shifting from a position of selfishness about me, to shifting to a position of compassion about you first, to deliver human rights to healthcare, nutrition, and education for all. And last but not least, addressing the adverse effects of rapidly accelerating technologies, which we now know could impact the future of humanity. We went in less than 7 months from enjoying ChatGPT to learning from its founder that it could destroy humanity. So these urgent global challenges are not something that we should feel necessarily out of control about. They're not only policy issues and problems, but each individual and organization can begin by thinking and speaking compassionately and taking the right action. These urgent global problems, however, are often lost in a sea of negative news, of domestic and regional news, and including the war, the invasion of Russia, repeated by Russia into Ukraine repeatedly since February 24th, 2022. And with that, I wanted to have us remember the words of Prime Minister Narendra Modi at a meeting in Uzbekistan with Vladimir Putin in September 2022, when he said, "I know that today's era is not the era for war. We've spoken to you many times on the phone before this, that democracy, diplomacy, and dialogue, these things help the world." So what helps the world, I would like to add, is that what helps the world is also the way forward for US-India relations. More dialogue, more diplomacy, and more democracy, as Prime Minister Modi said, as well as more cooperation and compassion, more conscious consumers, and more conscious capitalism. I say more about that in the article. In contrast to these noble goals and values, a tsunami of misinformation and conspiracy theories online, along with buy-in from various groups and actors, have sown discord and promoted polarization in many democracies. I don't have time to go into the US Prime case, but I did spend an entire page and a half on it, in part because I think you have to understand what's going on domestically in different countries to understand where they're coming from on foreign policy. We do have a situation where Trump supporters have had no respite from the Make America Great Again, MAGA messaging since 2015. When he declared his candidacy, Trump owned Truth Social and far-right Gab, 4chan, 8chan, and more platforms provide sources of support for the MAGA movement. Bannon's Breitbart and the cable channel Newsmax are framing these events and consequences in conspiratorial ways. So numerous studies have demonstrated the negative effects of social media on mental health. Research on QAnon, a transnational hive of conspiracies, banned by major networks, social media platforms just weeks before the 2020 election, and more are still out there. And we've seen some very difficult outcomes from that. And I go into that in the essay. President Biden's approval rating hit a new low, 41%, during the debt ceiling negotiations in early June. This was a strategy. Every time the Republicans are in the House and there's a Democrat president, this is what happens. But 73% of Democrats support more aid to Ukraine compared to 44% of Republicans, which suggests then that they're following their elite, Russian-funded many times through the NRA candidates who are speaking, or incumbents who are speaking. So we see political polarization in the US as a function of effective partisanship fueled by misinformation sources. In India, however, while elite polarization is evident online in the coverage of some highly critical outlets in messaging opposition party elites, it does not appear to have diminished the prime minister's popularity. Prime Minister Modi retains a trust of 78% of the public, according to the most recent Morning Consult poll. So despite the longstanding chorus of anti-government voices in both countries, with narratives run by the so-called right in the US and the so-called left in India against the Modi government, political leaders have cut through all this clutter and advanced diplomacy and cooperation on numerous occasions. A memorable example, going back to the Obama administration, was when Prime Minister Modi and President Obama co-authored an op-ed in the Washington Post on our common values, citing Swami Vivekananda's speech at the world's first Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893. The forward-looking governments of the India and the US continue cooperating on initiatives, including the US dialogues that we are all talking about now. It's incredible, I think, to have India running the G20. I think it's a great thing. And I could see the G20 line and wished I was in it when I was the last time at Bangalore, the line that was open for passports. I think the benefits of the sector cooperation that we're seeing from these technology cooperations are many. And I can cite experts. I do it in the paper with respect to space exploration. And we see that the White House has issued a statement about the visit of Narendra Modi, and it's all about cooperation. So I think we really have moved. I don't think the US understood when Biden said what he said that Ron showed us. That was February 24th, 2022. A lot has happened since then, including millions of Ukrainians leaving the country and a countless number of atrocities that will end up in an international court. But by now, they've read Jai Shankar's book on the India Way. And by now, I think they're better at understanding what lies ahead. And that is cooperation and consideration and understanding with compassion what is happening in other countries, and particularly in India. And I think they understand that energy needs, despite the major gains that India's made in in power that is not based on fossil fuels, it still requires some fossil fuels. Europeans, as well, as Jai Shankar, Secretary, has said in a number of press briefings when he was laying out some facts about which European countries are buying the oil, India had to put that forward. I think the US finally understands that. And so I'd like to just say we are all swimming in a sea of misinformation, and we have a problem there. And it would be wonderful to have the US and India work together on regulating media, regulating social media, that is, and as well as dealing with the thorny issue of generative artificial intelligence, as well as quantum computing. And in the meantime, for those who want to learn more about the prospects for US-India relations and the opportunities ahead, I'd say use government press releases, use government statements, look at research by experts, as well as news from outlets that report on actual developments, rather than seeing what I often see in the US in the New York Times or the Washington Post, the motives and the narratives that are the egos of the reporters who are talking about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Semetko, for bringing a dimension about India-US relationship that most of the people in India sometimes talk about, but policy planners in US sometimes are not focusing on that. The issue of, domestic issues in United States, how they are impacting the bilateral relationship. Now it's my pleasure and honor to invite Ambassador Kanwal Sibal former Foreign Secretary to Government of India to make his opening statement. Sir, kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. The topic is India-US relations way forward. In other words, whatever has been achieved in the past or not achieved in the past is possibly not the subject of discussion, but what we should look forward to. And I can only say that given the stage that we have reached in forging close bilateral strategic ties, the only way forward is to go forward more and more. Today, US relationship for India is the most important and the most wide-ranging relationship we have. We don't have this breadth of ties with any country, including our earlier very close strategic partner, which still remains our strategic partner, which is Russia. I think the United States understands, for various reasons, including the challenges that China is now presenting to the United States and to the West in general, that India has a very critical role to play in terms of ensuring that the Chinese ambitions are deterred and that China does not disrupt international politics and economics and security, because China is becoming increasingly stronger. The fact that the Prime Minister has been invited by President Biden is in itself an indication of the importance that the United States, for a variety of geopolitical reasons, wants to attach to India as a partner. And on top of that, the Congress has invited Prime Minister to address it, which shows that there continues to be bipartisan support for India. And this is important in the context of some of the issues that have been raised about our relationship with Russia, for instance, and our neutral posture on Ukraine. This indicates that whatever the reservations that there may be in US circles, and there are there, they think that the overall relationship with India is far more important than bickering over these issues on which we have differences. And this has been stated quite explicitly by people like Jake Sullivan to say that we are in the long haul. We don't expect India's relationship with Russia to be watered down immediately. It'll take time. And I think that is a very pragmatic, sensible approach, because, as I said, the breadth of our ties with the United States is such that the two countries will get more and more close to each other in various domains. And there are domains in which Russia is not is not the partner of the same value as the United States of America. We don't have any meaningful diaspora in Russia. In certain areas of technology, and not only defense technology, but technology in general, ICET, for example, the United States is our principal partner and will be, and not Russia. So the dynamics of the ties are very favorable. As you know, the two NSAs, which is unprecedented, chaired jointly a meeting on ICET with the business community from both sides present to open the doors for more cooperation in critical and emerging technologies. We've just had Defense Secretary Austin's visit. We're going to have Jake Sullivan's visit in the next few days. And this is to prepare for some concrete results from Prime Minister Modi's visit. Now, there is a lot of emphasis on defense, which is understandable in the context of China and our own problems with China and the need for us to strengthen our capacities vis-a-vis China, in which the United States can be very helpful. Therefore, when Austin was here, we let it be known that, United States needs to fast track technological cooperation with India, as well as co-production in areas like air combat and land mobility systems, in intelligence, in surveillance and reconnaissance, especially in the underwater domain. And we have pointed out that there remain very stringent hurdles which need to be removed, and there are very complicated rules and regulations. And I'll give you an instance, for example. We've signed all the foundational agreements. We signed the Industrial Security Annex. We are the major defense partner. And yet, we found out that during Austin's visit, the negotiations are going to begin on reciprocal defense procurement agreement and negotiations on security of supply arrangement, which means that there are such complicated procedures and regulations that even when you sign so many agreements on the defense side, on technology side, there still are more to be signed. And that is where the problem is. And therefore, it's going to take a lot of time before we reach the level at what we are expecting. But nevertheless, we are moving in the right direction. There is the whole issue of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, advanced wireless communication, high performance computing technology, and source code. And of course, there is space cooperation. There is this project for the GE 414 engine, which has received clearances. But whether the hot engine will be included in this is open to question. In any case, even if these clearances are given, in terms of concretizing it, it'll take a long time. These engines are not going to be developed overnight. There is the issue of armed drones, the Predator armed drones, which the United States wants to sell to us. We're going to have the inaugural session of the US-India Advanced Domains Defense Dialogue. That's a new defense dialogue that is on the anvil. Now, there are a couple of things I want to mention, and then I'll stop here. I think that despite the common challenges we face from China, our relationship with US or our bilateral ties should not become too China-centric. United States has very, very intensive ties with China, all said and done, $700 billion of trade. Now there's no longer any talk of decoupling, only de-risking, which means we'll remain couples, but we will reduce the risks, which means that things, very sensitive areas that we don't, in which China is monopolizing certain things, we will try to move away from China, which means that the relationship basically will remain strong in various ways. And the United States wants to reach out to China. They want communications with China. They're actually, in a sense, pleading with China to open lines of communication with China is refusing. Now, if the whole thing becomes too China-centric, then I think we could have a problem. So we should be a little watchful. Likewise, it should not become Russia-centric or Ukraine-centric, because our ties with Russia are very important in terms of our overall foreign policy. But more importantly, let us not forget, we are not a European country. We are not a North American country. We are an Asian country. So we have to be part of Asian geopolitics. We can't opt out of it. And China and Russia are dominating today, much more than before, Asian geopolitics. We must have a foot in. And since we have a very good relationship with Russia, we need Russia to balance China. And Russia needs us to balance China. Also, don't forget it. Let's not get carried away by propaganda that there are no differences between the two and they are thick as thieves. They may be temporarily thick as thieves, but they have their own larger national interests in mind. And finally, trade. $190 billion. Just a couple of years ago, the figures were last year it was $142 billion. Today it has reached $190 billion in goods and services, the largest trading partner that India has. And now we're talking about resilient, trustworthy supply chains and everything else. I will stop here because the last point I want to mention before I end is something which was mentioned earlier. It is that the American NGOs, including the State Department, the media, think tanks and others, they are not contributing to strengthening trust between the two countries. There is a constant barrage of criticism and against India on democracy backsliding, minority persecution, this and that and that. This just revives, in India, a certain degree of distrust, that there is a gap between what the administration is thinking or wanting to do and what the general foreign policy establishment is trying to promote in terms of what India is. And since the administration and the foreign policy and the NGO establishment in India are terribly interlinked, so we have to be very watchful. For the time being, it seems the administration is giving much more importance to the pragmatic part of the relationship rather than the ideological part which the NGOs and others are trying to promote. But let's see how this goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sibal, for your words of wisdom. I really appreciate, you touched on pretty much everything. Now we start the question and answer, moderated question and answer session. I had 3 rounds of questions for all 4 panelists. Unfortunately, one of our panelists dropped out because he had an engagement at 10:45 a.m. and because we exceeded the timings. So I'm going to address 3 questions addressed to the remaining 3 panelists in sequence. So the first question that I'm going to be asking, it is actually meant for Ron Aledo, but I will be asking Professor Semetko. And let's see how she answers that question, because it was specifically meant for Ron Aledo. Keeping in view the congressional recommendation that NATO +6 status be offered to India, and hypothetically speaking, and I'm saying hypothetically speaking, if government of India were to accept this offer, and there are early indications it may not, what critical technologies and specific weapon platforms the Pentagon will be able to offer to India? Please unmute yourself, Professor Semetko.
I might as well be mute because I really don't have an answer for you on the critical technologies that the Department of Defense is going to offer India. I mean, I can only, as a reader of and follower of what's being offered to Ukraine, can say that's where we're at. But I think just to return to that point earlier about NGOs and in the US and think tanks, et cetera, and this chorus of hostility on India, these things are not the US government. These things are not funded by the US government. They're private NGOs, right? And we know now that George Soros has a lot to do with this hostility, and he came out directly against Narendra Modi. And there's been money from Soros going to Democrats in the past, especially the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton campaigns and previous presidents. I don't know. Every Democrat I've ever donated to claims they don't take any money from corporate or wealthy. They're only getting small donors, right?
Thank you, Professor Semetko, for your honest answer on that question that was for Ron Aledo. I am going to our next panelist, and this is a specific question for him. And this question is for Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. There are recent attempts to shoot down the messenger, despite highly laudable references to External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar. Vituperous attacks have been made against him from certain quarters that claim to be close to Democrat Party in United States. Now, this is nothing new. Historically, Indian diplomats have been treated very shabbily in the United States, whether it is State Department or Department of Homeland Security or whatever. And I'll give you 3 examples. Ambassador Meera Shankar was patted down while she was on official trip on an airport because she was wearing a sari. And Department of Transportation Security Services, federal government department. Ambassador Hardeep Singh Puri, when he was permanent representative to United Nations, was asked to remove his turban When he raised the religious objection, he was put in a detaining hold. And lastly, Indian diplomat Devyani Khobragade was arrested in New York City on orders of a prosecutor who had political ambitions, and she was subjected. A diplomat was subjected to internal cavity searches and was arrested. Ambassador Trigunayat, if you were to be advising Prime Minister Modi, should he be telling President Biden that this needs to stop if we have to take this relationship to any level? In a civilized world, and we have ancient traditions also, the diplomats are immune. The diplomats have to be treated respectfully. What would be your take on this issue? Because we cannot shove it under the carpet.
Dr. Adityanjee, you have mentioned exactly the three incidents that have been, in my view, shameful and in violation of all the conventions, diplomatic conventions. And the United States, which considers itself as the highest hyperpower today or adherent to the diplomatic protocols, should have adhered to that. But we have seen this, that there is a certain other element that has played out at that time. But that time, if you know the reciprocal action that India had taken, because diplomacy is also reciprocity. It is not something that can be just done one side and you can think India is not a banana republic. India does respond, and it has been responding internationally. And I think Prime Minister Modi and the previous leaders have also conveyed it very strongly. I remember what happened to Devyani Kharbade. That time, India's action was very straightforward, highly reciprocal, and equal in content, not in terms of the kind of indecent behavior on the part of the attorney's office against her, but at the same time we have taken adequate action and conveyed the message. Today's India is very different India, and India, whether it is Prime Minister Modi or whether it is Dr. Jaishankar or any other minister, they speak their mind and they believe in exact reciprocity, but for mutual respect. And that's why we say, and I think if we need to carry forward this relationship, and I would quote Dr. Jaishankar, who said that there have to be 3 M's. Of course, in the context of China, but this very much applies in the context of any nation or the big power. And that is, one is mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest. So I think that Prime Minister Modi will convey if there are any incident like this. I doubt very much that the United States or various agencies would be indulging in these kind of things once again. Yeah. But whatever covert operations continue, that is something we'll have to be vigilant against.
Thank you, Ambassador Trigunayat, for clarifying the situation. And the next question goes to Professor Holli Semetko, which was specifically for her, and she has, in her opening statement, as well as in response to the first question, made some comments, but I will go to the question. Historically, and even now, there is some mutual trust deficit between United States and India. And it's not just the privately funded NGOs, it's the United States administration and parts of the US government that have focused unnecessarily on India's internal matters for decades, causing harm to bilateral relationship. And talking about the organs of the US government, United States Commission for International Religious Freedom, and Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, both of these organs of United States government are continuing to bring half-baked issues and actually are highly detrimental to bilateral relationship between India and United States. If you were the advisor to President Biden, what recommendations would you give to him? You may not be able to control the private NGOs, but you can certainly control the behavior of the government offices in the United States. What would be your advice to Mr. Biden?
Well, let me just mention that I have hosted Mira Shankar before we had a consulate in Atlanta. She's an encyclopedic mind, and we lobbied her to open the next Indian consulate here, as opposed to her choice was here or Seattle. So we were thrilled about that. I did not know about this incident. I didn't even know about these 3 incidents. And so I just want to say, first of all, I tell everyone to not go through New York. Okay. That's what I tell her. This is what they did to Carl Schwab. I mean, they do this to Germans. They do this to everybody. It's New York, right? Just go away. Don't go there. It's very problematic. I just am shocked about it, but I still think that I need to read up more on those things. On those terrible events, on this point about this committee of religion. This is there's been a bit of an interesting expose on the disinformation that comes out of it, given the connections of each individual on that committee. If I could advise the Biden administration, I would say, look at that. It's a lobbying organization, right? And it talks about the persecution of minorities, but look what happened in 2019 in India. What happened? Well, officially, everybody talks about the expansion of the BJP's base to include SC, ST, OBC. And so it's not just limited to upper caste Hindus as in the past, but people really aren't talking about the support received by Muslim voters. And I don't know why. I've seen it in exit polls that I've data that I've worked with, where people don't have any reason to lie about who they just voted for. I think what we're seeing is a change that means that a committee like that, which has a political agenda, is going to be increasingly unimportant. Whether Biden can go in and stop that, is a different question. We have enough right now on our plates between now and 2024, just like India, just like every country has with an election coming up in the near future. 24 will be a very pivotal year, with India going in the fall, in the spring, and the U.S. in the fall. And that's why I would like the 2 countries to collaborate on misinformation on social media. I've done some research myself on it, and my team and I work on with Facebook data. I'm one of the people who does the Social Science One project. And, you can see partisan disinformation or partisan misinformation on the vaccines in India. It's not, in fact, though, I think as big an issue in India, misinformation, as it is in the United States, because the U.S. is targeted by Russia, and India doesn't need to be targeted by Russia. India has this long historic relationship, as we know, and it also has several communist parties that report directly to the Kremlin, as far as I'm aware. And so, if you asked India to do something, you're asking Narendra Modi to do something right before a next election, when the parties can just pull people out on the streets and have massive demonstrations, as they've been shown to do in previous years. And so, I think in both countries' cases, we've got a 1-year time period in which we're going to see, more efforts to drive us apart. And I think we should try to think about more ways in which we can come together and recognize some of the serious problems that we face within our own domestic information ecosystems.
Thank you, Professor Semetko. You have answered that question very cogently. What is the real situation? Next question goes to Ambassador Kanwal Sibal. Typically, India has avoided joining military blocs or alliances in the past, very wisely. If you were currently advising the government of India, would you recommend that India accepts the NATO +6 offer or reject it, as it will impinge on India's strategic independence? I may add that a section of Indian American community is so thrilled by this offer, they are claiming ownership over it, whereas External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has already given indications that it is a non-starter. What would be your view, Ambassador Sibal?
I think Shankar has said what needed to be said. Uh, First of all, NATO is a transatlantic alliance, United States and Europe. Before the Ukraine war started, which is a European war, frankly, they were trying to find some justification for NATO, and they began these out-of-area operations, in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, and what have you. And now they have extended, trying to extend NATO to Japan and South Korea. But remember, both these countries are allies of the United States of America. So already they're allies. And instead of only depending on the US for their alliance, now they will be happier if the entire NATO group was to support them with regard to the security concerns vis-a-vis China. We are not in that category at all. We are not a European country. We are not in an area where US is confronting China directly and needs allies on the ground. So I think there's no question of India accepting NATO plus or things like that. It will actually mean overturning of 75 years of Indian foreign policy. And to what end? We will have to then leave BRICS, we'll have to leave SCO. We will totally distort our relationship with Russia. How is Russia going to deal with India as a NATO plus member? And all the defense ties we have with Russia and the dependence that still continues will get extremely complicated. In fact, if they started holding back spare parts and servicing and other things that we need, we will not be able to confront China on the border, where we have 50,000 troops stationed there. So it's a ridiculous thing, and I don't know why the Indian American community is so enthused about this. But let me, if you allow me, just 1-2 minutes on some of the questions you asked, the others on which I think some clarification is needed. One is that when the US State Department issued the report on human rights, Blinken, while issuing the report, mentioned 3 countries, singled out 3 countries in his covering statement. And for the first time at the level of the US Secretary of State, India was mentioned. And when this religious freedom report was issued recently, there was an unnamed US State Department official who said something which shocked me, which said that the Holocaust Museum in Washington is very worried about the situation in India, and they think that there is the potential for mass killings. This was stated by a US State Department official, though he didn't name himself. I can't guess who it was. This is unacceptable. And then, of course, Blinken himself and others, they say publicly, repeatedly, that as friends, we raise issues with India with regard to democracy and with regard to human rights, etc., because they want to cover their flank with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But then this sends a very wrong message to India. At the same time, India is invited to the Summit for Democracies, and it is repeatedly stated at the highest level of the US government that what brings the 2 countries together is that we share democratic values. And at the same time, there's a discordant note that comes from the State Department and from the Democratic Party. So there's a lot of confusion there. Yeah. And finally, I would say that all said and done, and this is important, our overall relationship with the United States is much bigger than these pinpricks, which are there, but which we have to assess and give a proper place in the overall relationship. We have to live with these and push back where it is necessary. But the overall benefits that the 2 sides will get in forging a stronger relationship is in the interest of the international community.
Thank you, Ambassador Sibal, for addressing the other issues also. My next question is supposed to be for Mr. Aledo, since he is no longer here. This question will go to Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, and it is related to some recent happenings that I will mention. In the early 2000s, President Bush offered cooperation and technology to develop ballistic missiles defense shield in India, but subsequent administrations lost interest. Do you envisage Pentagon sharing critical technologies used in BMD Shield for India to, strengthen our own indigenous BMD effort? Because India is purchasing S-400 defense ballistic missile defense shield system from Russia, and possibly S-500 also in future. And United States in its contortions, gymnastics, wanted to put CATSA sanctions. Do you think that this administration would be willing to provide critical technologies to India's ballistic missile defense shield so that India does not have to rely on Russia? Ambassador Trigunayat.
Well, I think that has been their design for a very long time. When they tried to put CATSA and try to dissuade India from buying S-400. But India has to take a decision on its defenses, that what is best for it. Very often, I mean, if you come to think of it, if you go by the CIPRI's report, India is diversifying very aggressively its defense supplies from different countries. It is not trying to just depend on one country or the other. Because we also know in the end that the United States, going by its own history all along, has some kind of a trust deficit at the grassroots level in India. And that is very difficult to bridge. And that is precisely what we have been getting from from Russia, or Soviet Union before that, the kind of a support. So while ICET has been signed and we have been discussing in the Quad for the critical technologies, there are working groups, there are all kinds of demands have been made. We are going to buy some of the drones, and India is continuing with this Make in India. And I think the United States is interested in doing it with India and will provide India with. We have developed BrahMos, as you know, with the Russian technology also. So which is finding a very good market outside as well. So India is becoming gradually a defense self-reliant country, wants to become. And in that, the technology from the United States and other countries is very welcome. And that's what precisely our minister, prime minister, everybody has been talking about to the United States. But as Ambassador Sibal said, the United States systems and the procedures are not only archaic, but they always look at everything in a very myopic angle. So I think that this is something that will take very long, and India, given its China challenge, cannot wait for that long. So it will be in United States' own interest to offer those technologies if it wishes to continue to partner with India.
Ambassador Trigunayat, my next question goes to Professor Holli Semetko, and this is a specific question for her. Yes, the trials are moving forward, but general perception in India is that despite improvement in India-US relationship, United States is not a reliable friend or ally in the time of need. And I'm not talking about 20 or 30 years ago. This notion was reinforced in India that United States and the Biden administration refused to supply the vaccine ingredients to India when India was facing the second wave of corona pandemic, because export of those ingredients was allegedly banned under Defense Production Act. Not only that, Biden administration also refused to export 60 million dosages of AstraZeneca vaccine that was not approved for domestic use in the United States. So it was just lying on the shelf and got wasted, and United States refused to supply it to India in those hard times. Mm-hmm. So those memories are fresh that United States is not a true friend.
Yeah. Yes, and definitely when you think about, sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, when you have a third of U.S. Republican, I mean, a third of the population in the U.S., many people voting Republican, not even taking vaccines, think about how many were wasted here. right? And so there was agreements signed with President Trump, with Pfizer, and I think these are issues that I'm learning about. I didn't realize that this wasn't available, but these are things that I think really should be aired, and I really think they need to be mentioned to Joe Biden. But if I could just make maybe 2-3 other comments quickly on the NATO plus situation. We have this saying in the US, like, well, you can ask anything, right? And I'm afraid where this came from was a Senate bipartisan committee that knows zilch about the history of India. And I don't know if General Austin brought it up again, but I do think that the origin, as far as I was concerned, read that it came from a Senate bipartisan committee. It, again, is a reflection of the naivete in a way that, more actors are in on possible foreign policy making than need be. I'm not sure that also it's understood that, even though everybody has an agreement in NATO to defend one another if one is attacked, we've seen, first, Ukraine is not in NATO. Second, it's taken Germany a long time to provide any resources, right? And so it's not that there's an automatic lockstep that we find all these allies moving together on. And to Putin's dismay, as a result of the invasion and the ongoing war, there's 2 new members of NATO, Sweden and Finland. Secondly, on the human rights, it would have looked, we have to look at the root of the problem. The root of the problem is we have a moral superiority complex, right? Eleanor Roosevelt's freedom, we start these organizations, she started the organization to kind of help others, but now we see multiple organizations pointing at India, right? And some of them that use expert interviews, I've contacted and I said, I can put together a committee of experts to be on your India team, and you might come up with different answers, right? Because they don't necessarily understand India. They're listening to the echo chamber that is coming out of the India's own domestic politics, which is very loud, even louder maybe over here. And so there's a problem with the source of this information. So for Blinken to ignore off maybe 4 or 5 organizations bringing up anecdotal evidence collected or reported by journalists, and that's what those organizations do. They issue these flashy reports. They give a couple of anecdotes. They never show you the data on how the country was rated. And they never reveal who their experts are. It's extraordinary. And I think that's that. But I do agree that, that's a shock to see that he had done that. The other thing I think we all would benefit from reading, which I have my students read in one of my media and politics classes, is The Sword and the Shield, which is the first volume of the KGB archives that were brought out by the lead archivist, Vasily Mitrokhin, when he defected and moved to the UK. And this was written by Christopher Andrew, a leading defense expert on Soviet intelligence. And I've had it verified by a colleague of mine who's written on Soviet spies in the United States. That you can see from here how effective the active measures are and have been up to early 90s, where that runs until in the United States, even affecting presidential primaries, in fact. And then there's, of course, the second volume, which was rather controversial in India, but, says a lot about in the 2 chapters on India. The focus is on, how easy it is to manipulate. And, so I don't even think our governments read anything on this to even understand the history. But to understand what my students understand is that Mrs. Gandhi, as prime minister, thought that she should trust a memo from that was fabricated in Pakistan, saying that the CIA has started the Khalistan movement. Now, I don't know if people still believe that. I think probably many people still believe that.
Professor Semetko, we need to go to the next question.
It's an issue. These issues are really unfortunate because we have a kind of a wedge between us and a historical belief system that has been influenced on both sides by an outside effort to sow discord.
My next question goes to Ambassador Trigunayat. India had tried or expressed some interest to join APEC as a participating economy in the period of 2014 to 2017. But both United States and China have been very lukewarm to India's participation in APEC process. In your opinion, would it not be an important confidence building measure on part of the Biden administration to invite India to the APEC conference formally when United States hosts the next APEC meeting in November of 2023 in San Francisco, despite Chinese objections, instead of throwing the crumbs of NATO plus 6?
Well, I think what you suggested is correct because United States' focus, and so is India's focus, is also in the Asia Pacific or the Indo-Pacific, as it is called now. So it is natural that India plays its part in it, and if they invite, then India will take a call on it.
The point I am making is that instead of throwing NATO plus 6, if Biden administration wants any confidence building measures, that should be in the economic realm rather than the military realm. In the same vein, I have a question for Ambassador Sibal, Kanwal Sibal. India-US bilateral trade has grown up in recent years, and you mentioned the figures of around 190 billion US dollars. During the Trump administration, there were some talks on a limited FTA between India and US. Would you advise PM Modi to discuss this issue with Biden administration, as an FTA will help both the countries, keeping in mind both these countries are out of both CPTPP as well as the RCEP. Both India and United States were supposed to be in RCEP, but because of concerns about Chinese predatory behaviors, both countries stayed away from it. So in this scenario, would it be justified for Prime Minister Modi and President Biden to revive those talks on at least a limited free trade area between the two countries?
First of all, the Democratic Party is very, very clear, and President Biden is very clear, no more FTAs. So it will mean a radical change in the position of the Democratic Party. And before the elections in 2024, they're not going to do this. Secondly, for any FTA, partial or otherwise, they need congressional authority, which they are not going to get. So this is a non-starter. But what can be considered, if not an FTA, but some sort of discussion, because, you know, they need a trade authority for an FTA on trade, but it doesn't apply to services. And since the services between India and United States is going to be the thing of the future, and there are enormous possibilities there, maybe we should talk now about a potential partial agreement of some sorts on services. Now, if that can be done, I think that would be a major step forward on the economic side. But then, you know, on the APEC thing which you mentioned, I don't think APEC is very relevant anymore, given the kind of big issues that are there between between United States on one hand and Russia and China on the other, who both are members of APEC. So even if Biden holds this meeting of APEC, I can't see the Russians and Chinese going there. But we have the IPEF now, the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, which has been created between India, United States, and a host of other Southeast Asian Indo-Pacific countries. I think there are 4 pillars. We have joined 3 pillars. We've not joined the 4th trade pillar, but we are keeping an eye on what is being discussed there. So I think there we can make some progress in terms of building up greater trade relationship between India and the United States.
Thank you, Ambassador Sibal. My next question is for Ambassador Trigunayat, and that is specifically for you. This question is that when the civil nuclear deal was signed between US and India in 2008, there was a lot of hype generated. Westinghouse was supposed to build 6 nuclear power reactors in India by 2017. However, nothing seems to have happened. But as part of this deal, India had to close down some research reactors and agree to very intrusive IAEA monitoring of its nuclear facilities. So the number of actually active nuclear reactors actually went down because of those issues. The Cyrus Dhruva reactor had to be closed down and taken off operations. Was it a mistake on part of India to sign the civil nuclear deal with the United States?
Well, I don't think it was, you in your own presentation, you mentioned about the 1998 and the United States reaction to it and the sanctions that were imposed on India, which the United States very soon realized and lifted rather quickly during the Bush time. And then the fact that the civil nuclear agreement was signed, I thought it was a major achievement at that time, which provided India a greater leeway and acknowledgement of India as really a nuclear power, even if we are not part of the NPT. So I think that this has given more to India in terms of overall, but you are right, absolutely, because of the liability factors and others, the United States really did not avail of the opportunity. And I hope that going forward, as we are discussing now, that will be one area which will open up for the United States. But India has not stopped. India has signed several agreements with with Russia on setting up the nuclear power plants with them. These are long and arduous negotiations every time, as you know, setting up a power plant. But I hope that the United States will find this now, or the companies will take advantage of the opportunity, as India is focusing a great deal on renewable and alternate energies.
Thank you, Ambassador Trigunayat. My next question is Ron Aledo question, and this would be turn of Ambassador Trigunayat, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal to take Ron Aledo question. Other two panelists have taken his first two questions. The United States freedom of naval operations in India's exclusive economic zone created bilateral problems in past few months, and it was not appreciated. It appeared that United States was using the China card to signal to China, but in the process antagonized India. What would be your specific advice to the Biden administration in terms of conducting FONOPs in India's EEZ, keeping in mind, ironically, that United States has not ratified the UNCLOS?
You know, this is an old issue. Which dates back many years. The United States has been doing this in India's EEZ. But what had happened was 2-3 years ago, whenever it was, that the US Navy announced the FONOF operation in India's EEZ. If they hadn't announced it, then it would have been what is happening in the past, that we protest quietly through diplomatic channels and the matter is left there. Once they made it public, then it became a public issue. But the United States has a very consistent position. They're not going to move away from it. They think that they have the right of innocent passage, including military vessels, through the EEZ, and that there is nothing in fact, in UNCLOS is not very clear about this. There is a little vagueness and ambiguity in UNCLOS on this. It is left to the coastal countries to develop their own regulations in regard to this matter, which countries are doing, which we are also doing. We want, if there is a military passage, for us to be informed. But that would amount to a foreign government like the United States taking India's permission, which they don't want to. Because for them, this is a worldwide thing, and the US Navy is everywhere. The strongest Navy in the world of any country, which can actually reach any point of conflict in a very short span of time. And that is what gives United States this global power, is the US Navy. So I don't think that so long as they don't publicize it, I think we have to live with this. We'll keep protesting. They will keep disregarding our protests. And there it is.
I think it was kind of signaling to China by making an open announcement that, it's not only China they are targeting, but they are targeting India also. So they were trying to just win brownie points with China.
No. It precedes, I know I've been dealing with it when I was in Foreign Secretary. It dates back long before they had this problem with China.
No, the public announcement I'm referring to.
Yes, public announcement. It was made at a very low level U.S. naval officer. And I think it embarrassed the United States that it came out publicly like that and forced us to react. But since then, I don't know if they're doing it or not doing it, but it hasn't become public.
So my next question goes to Professor Semetko, and this is a question specifically meant for her. The Roundtable Amendment was first passed in the United States Congress in 1991 to give special preference to Jews facing persecution in former Soviet Union states to immigrate to the United States on a fast track. Subsequently, in 2013, it was extended to Jews and Baha'is facing persecution in Iran to get a fast track to US immigration and citizenship. Why does the US administration, its official organs, and civil society have objections if a similar law called Citizenship Amendment Act that was passed by India to help gain Indian citizens to persecuted Hindus, Sikhs, and Buddhists who were already in India as refugees after having fled from persecution in Islamic theological states around India, namely Pakistan and Afghanistan? Why these double standards?
Well, first, I don't think most people in the United States understand the Citizenship Amendment Act. And when my students ask me, well, what's happening with Kashmir or what's happening with these protests, I explain, well, you can read everything you want in the US news media, and I will tell you a different story. I will just tell you what the law says and how it's being interpreted and how people probably were paid to sit in Delhi and protest for a long time. Then even a baby died. That's when I woke up and texted people saying, what's going on over there? I mean, the Citizenship Amendment Act provides a fast track to people who got there by 2014, end of 2014. And then the problem is that it got misunderstood because it was a Supreme Court ordered exercise for the National Register of Citizens in Assam. In Assam, does America understand that the Assamese students are the ones who don't want to have the immigrants? They don't want to, it's a complicated thing in Assam to begin with. Rajiv Gandhi had to deal with it in 1985, and it's still a complicated issue. And so I don't think people really understand what the Citizenship Amendment Act meant. And when I had Arvind Gupta speaking at Emory, because he was visiting Jagdish Sheth, I had him speak to my class, and he explained, yes, the reason Muslims were not in the agreement between Bangladesh and Afghanistan and Pakistan is because it would have totally offended our diplomatic relations with these three countries, and we would have been in trouble. We did what we could to bring out to help people who were already here. And this was something, as far as I knew, that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was in favor of this earlier, but it just didn't happen during his second term.
Thank you, Professor Semetko. My final question is for Ambassador Sibal. There was a time when State Department mandarins will lecture to India that international relations are not a zero-sum game. Whenever India, said anything about US relationship with Pakistan. Recently, and you have said, Ambassador Sibal, United States administration as well as think tanks and the strategic community has been cribbing about India's membership of SCO, RIC, and BRICS. If you were advising the Biden administration, would you recommend to him to integrate India into G8 as a formal countermeasure for India's membership in SCO, RIC, and BRICS? And alternatively, if you are advising PM Modi, an offer came from United States to join the G8 formally, would you recommend that India join the offer of G8 membership?
First of all, there is no G8, it is G7 because they expelled Russia
We haven't
in
extended to G8.
2014. Number two, to my mind, the G7 lost its relevance and its centrality after the 2008 financial crisis, which then compelled the G7 to broaden international cooperation on financial stability and economic growth by creating the G20. So really speaking, it's the G20 that matters today. But because of the Ukraine conflict and the adamant position of the United States and Europe to bring into the G20 discussions Ukraine and insist on condemnation of Ukraine, failing which they will not allow joint statements to be issued, has complicated the G20 process. And I am not very certain whether we'll be able to issue a joint statement in September when there is a summit hosted by India. So now that the G20 is facing these difficulties because of Ukraine, because there are opposing voices within the G20 which do not accept the Western narrative on what's happening in Ukraine and resist condemnation of Russia. So the G7 is now going back to its roots, and they met in Hiroshima recently and issued all kinds of statements. But frankly speaking, G7, it means what? It means United States, Europe and its allies, and Japan. That's it. They're no longer central to the global economic scene, or for that matter, even the political scene. The fact that China is out of the G7 doesn't make sense. The largest manufacturing country in the world, the largest exporting country in the world, the second largest economy in the world. I'm not in favor of China joining the G7. What I mean is the G7 is not that relevant anymore. But China is in the G20. Russia is in the G20. And that is the organization which needs to be strengthened. And hopefully, once the Ukraine crisis is over, we will hopefully see some kind of sanity in terms of the agenda of the G20 and the G20 promoting international consensus on issues of the day. Because if you see the kind of agenda that we have, which in India currently is responsible for, it covers everything. So that is where the key question is for India, not G7.
Thank you, Ambassador Sibal. We have run out of time. We are already over our time. So before I thank our distinguished panelists, I will, as moderator, mention only two things. In year 2005, in an article I had given, talking about India-US relationship, 5 mantras and 10 commandments. Although that was 2005, those 5 mantras and 10 commandments still hold true as far as taking India-US relationship to the next level is concerned. And I would hope that students of international relationships will read those 5 mantras and 10 commandments so that they understand what are the nuances involved in this complex dialogue. Second issue is that, yes, we want to take this relationship to a new level. Having said that, India is not United States and United States is not in India. We belong to different geographies and our differences have come out in open, and we should be able to talk about our differences and not have an attitude of either you are with us or you are against us. Again, in an article on India-US relationship, I have stated that India and US cannot be marriage partners. There's no holy matrimony. All we can hope is we are part-time lovers, we have some mutual interests, and we should work on those mutual interests. Other times, we are free to pursue any other relationship as we may deem necessary. And again, the message is there are no zero-sum games in international relations. India has relationship with United States. India will continue to have relationship with Russian Federation. And India will continue to have a kind of relationship with China also, despite having bilateral problems. So maturity in international relationship demands that you don't make finicky demands on a dialogue partner. And with that, I would thank Professor Holli Semetko, Mr. Ron Aledo, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, and Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. I also thank our audience on a Saturday morning. They took more than 90 minutes of their time for this discussion. And lastly, my heartfelt thanks to Team CSA, Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, Mr. Rajiv Verma, and Mr. Ankush Bhandari, who are pillar of my support and allow me to hold these kind of programs and discussions under the auspices of Council for Strategic Affairs. For a more detailed account of CSA activities, please go to our website, www.councilforstrategicaffairs.org. Just an announcement, we will be having a distinguished lecture by a domain expert on June 24th, and that domain expert is going to be Ambassador Partha Sarathi, who will be giving a lecture on internal implosion in Pakistan, the regional security implications. So I hope all of you would be able to join us again on June 24th, Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Day Time. Namaskar. Thank you very much.
Namaskar. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.